Hi, welcome to 418 Astrology. Tonight, I wanted to talk about someone who I think is an unusual figure in American politics and now in American history. And he's someone that we don't hear a lot about, even though he is important. He's the Vice President of the United States. He is J.D. Vance. So I thought by looking at his chart, we could maybe learn a little bit more about him. One of the first things that I noticed looking at his chart, he was only born in 1984, so this is a young man, uh, close to 40. The other thing I noticed looking at his chart is there isn't anything in it that screams anything to me. Um, Sometimes charts just don't, and the secrets are not so obvious in them. But here's another chart. This is a chart for the musician Jeff Buckley. And I mean, you can see just by the way all these trines and oppositions that he had, you can, it's not hard to realize that this must have been the chart of a genius kind of thing. And charts of geniuses don't always look like this, but oftentimes they have something unusual or powerful about them. JD Vance's doesn't really have anything like that. At first glance, it seems like a normal chart. So there's one thing that I do know about JD Vance astrologically, and that is that he has the same ascendant as Donald Trump does. And so out of all the 360 degrees of the zodiac, they were born when the same star was rising. That star is Regulus, and it's a fixed star, and it's in the sign of Leo, and it's a very powerful one. It's associated with rising politically, ambitious wise, but also having great falls. And so it's interesting that they both are associated with that. And I think for JD Vance, it's also worth noting that he's already had a great rise. He hasn't come to the vice presidency uh, through the usual way. He wrote a book and seems to have gotten friendly with some tech pros and kind of got in that way, which is very unusual. We haven't seen that in our lifetime. Usually, our presidents and vice presidents have always been politicians. And that's not the case with Trump. That's not the case with J.D. Vance. So that's just something to notice right away. The Leo-ness of him is something to notice right away. This is someone with Leo rising and Leo in the first house. So he's a double Leo. His moon is over here in Libra. We'll talk about that. But being a double Leo and having two planets in Leo, he has the Sun and Venus here. Uh, these speak to a strong Leo type character. This is someone who Leos can seem like they're the main characters sometimes in everybody's story. And there's probably aspects of JD Vance that are no different than that. The Leos are ruled by the sun, and the sun is really a force that's in the process of becoming. And it's filling out your blueprint is what the sun is always doing. It's having you grow. It's turning acorns into oak trees. It's turning sunflower seeds into sunflowers. And so the more the sun shines on you, the more you become who you truly are. And so there's that becoming theme that's always there with Leos. And that gives them a kind of larger than life aspect that makes people drawn to them. And because they're always in the process of becoming the next thing, becoming. And so this is something that he would have too. I It's not something that I have noticed in him per se, but if we went back to his history, if we knew more about his history, it would probably be there. Him being kind of the star of the show type personality. Uh, and right now, it's hard to know his personality because of his job, ironically. But looking at this, That's the first place I went, is the ascendant. And I always teach that the ascendant is the first place to go. When you're excuse me, when you're analyzing a chart, the ascendant is the first place to go. So after the ascendant, where do you go? You if it's a day chart, if the sun is above the horizon, as it is here, the first place you go is the sun. And if it's a night chart, the first place you go is the moon. And so they have differing importances depending on whether it's day or night. So, and if J.D. Vance or anybody had been a nighttime Leo, that would be an entirely different kind of person. Being a daytime Leo just adds to the sun, to that energy of becoming, becoming, becoming. Interestingly, now that I know he's a Leo, there are these memes that people have created online distorting his face and kind of puffing it out to make it look really huge or like baby-like. And the most famous one, they gave him these long curly locks that sort of look like cowardly lion locks. They're very leonine. It's funny how these images, they always come up and they reappear, and we can hold on to them and analyze them and see what they have to say to us. So we would want to start with that sun. One thing I would want to say before I begin, though, is looking at someone's chart, oftentimes it can be helpful to know what you're looking for going in. And if you see that, then you'll know it when you see it, if that makes sense. So I would say someone like J.D. Vance would have to be ambitious, right? Uh, and that comes with having that fixed star Regulus on the ascendant too. So where do we see the ambition in the chart? Ambitious not just to become vice president at 40, but also ambitious to break out of nowhere, write a book about your experiences, show it to the world, sell it. There's ambition there. And he's someone who, admittedly, I think the book says he came from humble upbringing. So I'd be looking for where's the ambition in this chart. So that's just something to think about. Some of the ambition is embedded in this Sun Venus ascendant collection in the first house. This is someone who has a real sense of self and a real sense of their own becoming. Those memes I was talking about where they distort his face, supposedly he thinks they're hilarious. And sometimes people say that they're laughing along and they're really not. I got the sense that he did think they were funny, which shows it shows a certain amount of having it together as a person, a certain amount of sense of self that you're not going to be destroyed by somebody distorting your face in Photoshop, and you can enjoy it for what it's enjoyable for. So there's the sun, and I would say the placement of the sun in the first house and as the ruler of the whole chart, this is someone who's here to be themselves, who's here to really fulfill their own individual identity. And that's something that's constantly happening because that's what the sun is constantly doing. So let's look. My next thing that I would say to look at in standard chart looking is the moon. Um, the moon is down here in Libra. Interestingly, you can look at the lines here. These show the aspects. This moon is not really connected to anything. So I think that's interesting. Looking back at the sun has these strong sextiles and trines and a square coming out of it. We didn't really analyze those, but we can come back to them if we need to. But the moon, by contrast, really isn't linked up to much of the chart. It has a weak trine to Chiron up here, and it has a weak sextile to the first house Venus. So, but other than that, this moon isn't really talking to anybody else in the chart. It's by itself. And I would say that's the opposite of the energy that we've seen so far in this chart. The the ability to write a book and have it be a bestseller. Some of that is private. if that makes sense. You'd have to be a private person. And that may be what's shown here with the Libra moon, especially in the third house, which has to do with writing and communication. And so that part of life, that part of his work may have come relatively easily to him. And he was able to really make it work with the needs that are outlined in the first house. It's also definitely worth noting that Pluto is there near the moon, and it's 10 degrees away, but even just sharing the same house, Pluto is important when it's bothering any other planet. So what Pluto does is it intensifies. And so this gentle Libra moon is is being intensified by this Pluto. And so what does that do? What does that look like in real life? I see the Libra moon as his writing, and the Pluto being there may add an intensity to his writing. And I don't know the stories of how he wrote it or what he's like, but there are people that bring a lot of intensity to their writing. I'm thinking of Stephen King. He's written those memoirs about, writing and writing and writing while drinking Listerine all night. And with this Pluto moon thing, that's the kind of thing it makes me think of, that the writing may be fueled by something more intense, and we don't know what that is. All right. So we did the sun, the moon, and the rising sign. This is really the snapshot of what this chart wants us to know is are these three things. And we can walk away from it having looked at the sun and the moon and the rising sign. We can feel like we've got the basics of his chart. That doesn't mean that there aren't things in the chart that are hugely important that we would want to look at. But it, if you wanted to write a one paragraph essay about J.D. Vance's astrology, we've written it. We can add more paragraphs. We're about to add more paragraphs. But the one page paragraph we just did, the sun, moon, rising sign. So where do we go from here? We can either go through the benefics and malefics, which is always fun. So go through Jupiter and Saturn and then Venus and Mars, or we can sort of see where the chart grabs our eye. Nothing in this chart grabs my eye. So let's try going through the malefics and the benefics. So I'll start with Saturn. He's the greater malefic, and he's down here in the fourth house. Saturn in Scorpio, no less. So what Saturn does is he's a restrictor. Uh, he he binds us from doing what we want to do necessarily. He's a teacher. But people do not enjoy the experience of Saturn, not unless you're utterly prepared for it. If you're the top kid in the class and Saturn comes in and you've done all your homework and you're ready, Saturn's your best friend. But for most of us, Saturn's ahead of where we think we want to be. Sometimes I say that Saturn always depicts the worst place in someone's chart. So it's interesting for J.D. Vance that his Saturn is in the fourth house. Um, that suggests a difficult upbringing. And I haven't read the book, but that's seems to be some of the point of the book. Uh, and difficult, and one can imagine strictures or restrictions um, being part of that. This isn't someone who would be uh, footloose and fancy free doing whatever he wanted to do because of this upbringing. Interestingly, the Lot of Fortune is right next to Saturn here. This might be a reference to having writing a successful book about this experience. So there's Saturn. We'll go to Jupiter, the greater benefic. Saturn's always or usually experienced as unpleasant. Jupiter is usually experienced as pleasant. And so here he is. He's in the sixth house, and he's connected into things here. Um, he's not all by himself like the moon. And so what is this Jupiter in the sixth house telling us? So this would be the best place in the chart. So sixth house is everyday things and it's health. And So these would be two parts of life that J.D. Vance would excel at. With Jupiter in the sixth house, this is someone who could probably form a really good daily routine and stick to it. That may have helped with the writing of the book. Let's see what else we got here. And so Jupiter just brings blessings, good things wherever it is. It's also close to Neptune, even though it's in a different sign. And Neptune speaks of imagination. And so these two things are a bit bound up. This may be talking about the daily work of writing. He may, with Jupiter here, this is a good sign for health because Jupiter is a good sign and the sixth house is all about health. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Is this is someone who's you wouldn't bet on them being sick and leaving their post because they're ill. At least the story of their chart as it's told shows somebody who's healthy. So after that, we would go to Mars and Venus. So let's do Venus first. Venus is also a benefic, like Jupiter, in that her energies, we like them. We experience them as pleasant. And all Venus does is attract, attract, attract. So he's got Venus on the ascendant, which is always interesting. This makes for a beautiful or attractive person. And it also it also makes for someone whose viewpoint is that of a beautiful or attractive person. The ascendant goes both ways. Just about everything in astrology is double-sided or goes both ways. So J.D. Vance, according to his astrology, has looks or attractiveness or charisma on his side. The I think that's very much a matter of personal taste. I do think it's interesting with this Venus on the ascendant that he has the look. I think it's just the way his eyelashes are, but he looks like he's wearing eyeliner. And that's very Venusian, and unusual and particularly feminine. And so that may be a reference to that, this Venus on the ascendant. So now we'll get into Mars. Mars is the lesser malefic, and his energy is separating. Mars is also in the fourth house of home and family. And we can see, because we're going through the whole chart in order, we can see what's important and we can see which parts of the chart really stand out. And it's been first house and fourth house. We really haven't talked much about anything else in here. The Jupiter thing is there. It's not very interesting. But Mars. So here's Mars in Scorpio. This is a very strong Mars. And it's in the home. It's in the fourth house. And it is at 22 degrees of Scorpio. And J.D. Vance's midheaven is here at 22 degrees of Taurus. So this is an exact opposition. And it's a very tight opposition. You can tell that because the line is drawn really thickly. But you can also tell by looking at the numbers. So this is where I think the ambition probably lies. Anything to do with midheaven often has to do with career. And so what is it opposing in that Mars? What is Mars opposing here? Obviously, the Mars wants to engage with with midheaven. There's sort of a showdown here going on. The Mars wants to separate and distinguish itself on the home front because that's what Mars does and what Mars is, and that's very much in conflict with the midheaven. I would say one way to interpret this is he would have he would have had to give up some of this Mars stuff. He was probably a mover and shaker in his own family, in his own world, his own milieu, and he would have had to give that up in order to and kind of leave that world behind in order to rise to midheaven, in order to fulfill his destiny, for lack of a better word. So that doesn't really show us ambition per se. The Scorpio Mars can certainly be ambitious all on its own. Uh, and that opposition really brings up a tension that could bring out ambition. I think this is probably where it is in the chart, what we were looking for. Let's see. The only other thing that I would notice here is he's got Uranus in the fifth house. So I know that J.D. Vance is married to someone who is of foreign extraction. I don't know that much about her. I think she may be Indian. And so all of their kids are part Indian. And that's something that in the Republican Party is really kind of frowned upon. This is something that he's taken some heat for. And that might be seen as an unusual choice, as a Uranus type choice in the realm of children, which is fifth house. So, oh, another thing to notice here too is we've got the North Node of Destiny here, and that's pretty close to midheaven. This is something that would strengthen, sort of like the Regulus fixed star. This is something that would strengthen his it would strengthen his move towards the top. So I think this was an interesting chart that tells us a lot about him. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments.